Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Glenn Carlson. This is the Dent Podcast, and in this conversation I'm talking to Katherine Maslen. Katherine's a good friend of mine. She's a naturopath extraordinaire, and she is an exemplar of the key person of influence methodology and approach to business. She's also one of the coaches within the Dent community. Now, when I first met Katherine, was paying her receptionist more than she was paying herself. She's now got a multi-million-dollar recurring revenue naturopathy business that's moved into telehealth and has enabled her to be able to service clients all around the country and even the world. This story is a transformation from a very traditional approach to delivering one's knowledge and skills to a 21st century approach, leveraging media, leveraging technology, leveraging her thought leadership. She is the creator of the Shift podcast. She is the founder of Shift itself, which is her health and wellness clinic, and she is the author of the book Get Well, Stay Well. I highly encourage you, if you are an entrepreneur, a business leader, someone that has knowledge, skills, and expertise, but you think there might be a better way that you could package and share that with the world, not just to have more impact, but to create more income as well, I think you're going to get some value from this conversation with Katherine. So let's get into it. Katherine Maslen, welcome to the Dent Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Ooh, I'm excited. Look, you've had a pretty, I mean, we've known each other for about 8 years now, I think, and you've had a pretty remarkable journey, not just in terms of developing your own personal brand, the brand of your business, but you've innovated in the level of your products, you've gone digital, you have a physical clinic in Brisbane, which we'll get through and unpack, but you've also wrapped a digital layer around that. It's been a pretty big journey, but for someone that maybe doesn't know who you are and what you do, and if we were to start just talking about pitch, I suppose, kind of when someone asks you, what do you do, whether you're being introduced on radio or the media or for an interview, what do you say?
Depends who I'm pitching to, but generally I would say I have a wellness company called Shift, and we help people to shift their health and their life. And we do that in a number of different ways. We have a physical clinic in Brisbane where we have a multimodality practice with natural therapies, but we also help people worldwide through our online memberships, products, and programs.
That's so clean. But that is not what you would have said 8 years ago, I suppose. How if you were to go in the TARDIS time machine and go back in time, and if I had have asked you the same question, like, what was life like then? How are you thinking about what you do then?
So I would have said I'm Katherine Maslen and I'm a naturopath. I might say that I owned a clinic, but I might not either. So back in those days, I wouldn't even want my patients to know that I owned my practice.
Why?
Which is a total paradigm shift. I don't know. I guess it was that whole, I don't know, I kind of hid behind the business in a way. I didn't think that my personal brand was important. I didn't think that I needed to be in that space.
Was it because business people are like something about business people, or was it like wanting to make them feel like the business was bigger than you, or just didn't even think about it?
I'm not exactly sure. And I guess it was 8 years ago, and I'm such a different person now than I was back then. But I guess it would have had to do with, a bit of imposter syndrome or something along those lines, not really feeling deserving of being a business owner or something like that. There'd have to be different layers of things. But yeah, it was a really interesting paradigm because when I think about it, I did kind of hide behind my business and I'd see patients, and back then I was still doing clients 4 or 5 days a week. And I'd see my patients, but I wouldn't, on the website, it wasn't like, this is Katherine Maslen's clinic. Not at all.
Yeah, it's interesting that this stuff doesn't just sort of change your business, right? It changes your life. It changes who you are. Like it provides a different perspective, or I suppose a paradigm in the world. How would you explain to someone that hasn't experienced a real shift like that as it relates to their business, like the result of them developing their business or their brand has not yet created a paradigm shift? How would you even kind of explain the notion that has changed you so much to someone?
Yeah, well, I guess my business is called Shift. So this is what we're explaining to people on all levels all the time. And yes, we help people shift their health, but it also shifts their life. And I think if you bring that back down to business, your business is an extension of you, I believe. And by improving your business and getting really solid with that, you get personal growth and development, but also by working on personal growth and development, that then shines through to business. So I think for me, that's definitely the case. It's working on the business and gaining confidence and getting some runs on the board and going, oh, actually, I know who I am and what I'm here to do, has really helped me to step into my power and who I am. But then also personally working on my own stuff and my own shit has allowed me to step into the business more, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I find personally like my shit, like my inner world stuff tends to manifest with stuff going wrong in the business, right? Because there's either stuff I'm ignoring, or there's stuff I don't understand, or stuff that I'm not focusing on to the degree that I should be. And so the business is like a sandbox for personal development. And it's like my radar. It's like, oh, there's something to work on there. Or something will break in the business and that'll push my inner buttons as well. So it's like this double feedback loop that it's either evolve or die almost.
Yeah. And I think it takes some time to build resilience around that as well. And actually, every business owner I speak to has this same story. They're like, oh, when that used to happen, it used to really impact me. Like we had a thing recently with a team member and we had to get lawyers and there was all this drama. And I was like, 2 years ago, this would have really impacted me on a personal level. But now I'm like, it's just part of it. It's another challenge to deal with and we're going to go there. But it took quite a few years to build up that resilience to get to that point. Yeah. So I think when we're new in business, and when I say new, I would say in the first 10 years, 5 to 10 years, where it's, building those skills and resilience and just living it to be able to get to that point where things don't bother you as much. But like it's your baby, when things go wrong, it does affect you personally.
Do you think it's because in the early days, you're closer to the whole thing just stopping working and like, oh, there's my income, it's my livelihood, and it's kind of you're potentially lower on Maslow's hierarchy? Or do you think it's a resilience thing and you've just got the muscle for it, combination of the two?
I think it's a bit of both. And I think it depends on the person, right? Because for me, I know in the times with my business where cash flow has been really tight, every little thing is that, like, what's happening? How do I deal with this problem? What if I can't deal with this problem? Whereas when your cash flow is better, you're like, oh, there's a problem. But if it's a problem, it's a problem. So it keeps us as business owners when we have these fluctuations in stress a lot of the time. Like, I don't know about you, but I've definitely experienced some significant stress, higher than the average worker bee, as a result of owning a business. And I do think it's a combination. It depends on what skills have you built, what has been the resilience, but also, where are you in your business at that timeline?
Yeah, I was talking to a mate the other day and he introduced me to a phrase that I hadn't heard before, but I could definitely relate to it, is like he called it high functioning anxiety. Right. So in the same way you can have like a high functioning alcoholic or a drug addict or something, it's like, and he's like, my doctor diagnosed me with he's I think naturopath, someone like that, sort of diagnosed him with high functioning anxiety. And he's like, that was it. That was the label. That makes sense. It's like, it's always there. It's like a perpetual zzz. And he's like, the times in my life where it hasn't been there, I haven't been growing and I haven't felt like I've been doing anything meaningful. It's like, it's almost like that high functioning anxiety means I'm pushing. Like it means I'm expanding into areas that I am unfamiliar with, where there are consequences to getting it right or getting it wrong. Right. And they're not financial consequences for him anymore, but still, we create the different models in our mind of upside and downside. And I found that phrase, high functioning anxiety. Have you ever heard of that before?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also, I think we operate in just a constant flight or fight, which drives some of that anxiety as well. It's always like we're in danger. It's like, I'm not safe, because there's always something to think about. There's always something hanging over your head. It's difficult to find those moments of peace sometimes in business, I think, until you've got the structures and things built and sorted out to create that space for yourself. And I think as business owners, one of our biggest things is not focusing on creating space in however way that looks for you, for that to happen. That needs to be an end goal.
Well, I'm curious, and I'd love to get into some of the before story about your business? Because I know one of the things that you kind of mentioned were in the green room is that one of the early frustrations was around team and culture and just having everyone feel like they were owning the business. They're probably more my words than yours, but I know now there's been a huge shift. The fact that you're an expert in health, wellness, and you're an expert in understanding, the cascading consequences of cortisol and its abuse. You're in business which is essentially a bunch of electrodes strapped to you, doing their best to induce a cortisol stress sort of reaction. Given that you're across all of those things, like how maybe even better, how did you in the early days, given your expertise as a naturopath and healthcare practitioner, and also having the awareness that I'm being triggered by my own business, like what are some of the protocols that you put in place for yourself, and how's that cascaded out to your team, etc.?
So I guess one of the things I want to say up front is just because I'm a naturopath, it doesn't mean that I don't suffer from the same stuff that other people don't, which is impacts of stress or other life forces. My biggest ally is herbal medicine. Like legitimately. So in herbal medicine, there's a class of herbs called adaptogens. It's a term unique only to herbal medicine, and their job is to help you to adapt to stress. Without adaptogens, there's no way I would be where I am today. I would have reached burnout or done other things. So for me, the self-care is really important, but I still do the stuff and I still expose myself to things that I perhaps shouldn't, and that might be pushing myself and doing things, but I can see what I'm doing is a difference. So I can see that I'm like, okay, sleep will go first. It'll be like, I can't fall asleep at night. Okay, what am I doing? My self-care is not there. I need to sort my stuff out. If I'm meditating regularly, I'm good. So I think self-care is really important. I guess this is what our whole company is built on, teaching people what are the things that I need to thrive. So for me and my team, it's like, well, what do we need? For me, space is really important. And I say space as in just time of being and not doing something, right? And creating those moments, because when it gets really busy, I remember one point in my business, I would have been working probably 70, 80 hours a week. It was like come home, doing social media stuff at night, writing a book, working on weekends, going on a cruise, writing a book while I was on the cruise, flying everywhere, doing all of this stuff. And I just know for me, I can't operate at that level, maybe in short bursts, but that's not sustainable for me in my life. And I've got a 9-year-old daughter as well. So it's just not something that works for me. So I think as business owners, we do need to be super aware of our self-care and looking after ourselves mentally, physically, emotionally, and having those support structures in place. And I think part of that is to having a community of other people that are going through the same thing, or, building the same thing, so that you can actually soundboard this stuff off of them. Because normal people, normal people that aren't entrepreneurs, aren't business owners, they don't get it. It's hard to comprehend. People who don't own businesses think that business owners just make a heap of money for not doing much. And coming back down to that team culture piece, I really, at the start, we had this culture where all of our team members just thought that I made heaps of money and that was just living the high life kind of thing. But in the background, it's like, well, no, I'm working 70 hours. I'm making less than you this week, actually. And there's this whole kind of paradigm around that. You go to business and you go into a cafe, and then all of a sudden you're like, how are they surviving? There's 4 staff over there. They're paying electricity. Like, how are these people actually operating, right?
There's 2 people. There's 2 people in the shop. They're just drinking coffee. Like, what? Coffee's not even that expensive. Like, I think that all the time. Like, how to. Anyway, that's a whole other conversation. You mentioned paying your team more than you. I've had that personal experience as well in the early days where. There was many months there where my team were getting paid more than I was. Was that something that was a common thing back in the day?
Yeah, definitely. For a good couple of years on and off, definitely. And not all of them, but some of them, and usually the ones that complain the most back in those days.
Beyond just the complaining, like what's the what the objective psychology that would cause you as a business owner to pay someone more than you, right? Because again, for people listening that are kind of like maybe facing that, or even for the employee that just doesn't even get why you would even consider doing that, like what's the mindset behind it?
For me, a lot of the time, And this is where actually, if I'm really honest, I've gotten into traps with it, because a lot of the time I've been like, well, it's okay because I'm building for this, rather than being really aware, hold on, how much am I paying people? Are they really necessary? The amount of money I've lost from staff that were mismanaged because I haven't wanted to look at this stuff is just phenomenal. So there's definitely that piece of it. But then on the other side, yeah, there's definitely moments where you're just like, God, like, can we pay the ATO this week? Can we pay superannuation? And meanwhile, you're kind of having that money filtering out. So there's a lot of complexity to it, I think. And it's not a place you can stay in for a very long time, I don't think either, because, well, A, you can't feed yourself and do the things that you want to do, but it's just not sustainable, right? So it's really being strategic about it. And for us, we still go through periods where things are really tight because we're investing. We just had 4 new websites built. That's pulled the cash out of the business pretty decently. So things like that will ebb and flow. But it's, I guess now after 10 years in business, I have a bit more foresight of planning and what does that mean and what are we going to get from that, rather than flying blind a little bit, jumping off the cliff and just building my plane on the way down.
Was there an old paradigm, new paradigm moment in terms of your evolution from sort of approaching your business you were not wanting to be known as the business owner, certainly not wanting to put your face on any of your material or your websites, kind of hiding behind the business in your own words. And of course now you're the direct opposite of that, and it's working. So was there like an inflection point where you had some form of an epiphany and it was like, oh, I need to change my perspective, or was it a slow burn that kind of brought you around?
I think that there were many small points, definitely. And I think engaging with KPI, the Dent community, it was the first time that I found a tribe. And I was like, oh, this is where I'm meant to be. This totally makes sense. And it's really interesting about the whole hiding behind the business thing, because I had my own profile, had my own website, I'd done a little bit of media. So I was doing Katherine Maslen stuff, but I just didn't associate it with the clinic. Weird, right? It was kind of strange. I don't know. Now that I think about it and say it out loud, I'm like, that was a really odd decision, but I guess that's, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. And so, because you were, and a lot of people are, they're doing bits of profile here and there. I think they tend to be doing it to try and grow their business. It's often not working particularly well. They're often sort of approaching it in the wrong way. What have been some of the lessons, I guess, that you've found that have, because I mean, you've been playing this game for 10 years now, or eight to 10 years now. You obviously would have learned a few things about what it means to develop yourself as the face of your own business. Yeah,
I think it was finding my voice and really giving space to go, what am I actually here to do? What is my why? What are we doing here? You become a naturopath because you want to help people. So for me, I guess my personal story is I grew up in a home with domestic violence. When I was 15 years old, moved to the Daintree rainforest by myself because I was addicted to heroin in Melbourne, living on the streets. I was very lucky that a friend of mine moved up there with her mother. Would you like to come with us? And I got out of that situation. So at that moment, that's a massive moment in my life. And I met a family there, and one of the family members was really sick. Her name was Jenny, and she had lupus. So lupus is a progressive autoimmune disease. And Jenny just got sicker and sicker. And that really sparked something inside of me to go, what's wrong with our healthcare system? This isn't working. She's not well. And then I stumbled across herbal medicine, a book on herbal medicine, and went on to study naturopathy. So for my why, I always knew, I was like, the healthcare system's broken. How do we fix this? Right? How do we work on this? And so I've always had that underlying drive, but then on a bigger sense, I'm like, well, what is this clinic about? What are we trying to achieve here for people? And I think there's been a few moments of truth with that where it's like, okay, well, we are here to help people and we want to create this big thing. And even recently I had another one where, yes, we rebranded to Shift a few years ago. Our overarching mission is to change the face of health. From reactive to proactive. There's so many different layers of that, but to really fix healthcare, and get people thriving. So on top of that, because of my background with the domestic violence stuff, at the moment, I'm really working in areas with women. I've just released a podcast series on women's health in the last episode, just by not I didn't plan it to be this way, but it ended up being on women's violence, domestic violence, inequality, things like that, areas that I didn't think the podcast would go into, but themes kept coming up. And it really ignited this kind of spark in me to go, actually, I really want to do more work in this area and actually find my voice and step into this, because I do have stuff I want to say about it. So see how it can kind of evolve and change as things go along. So I think for me, the evolution has been continual, and it always will. Like, one of my highest values is growth. Anyone who's around me, they grow, and that can be messy sometimes. With growth comes growing pains and things like that. But people who are in my circle, they tend to grow. And I guess that's just kind of part of who I am.
Yeah, sure. I love that. And I guess what I'm hearing is that you didn't find your voice in a seminar room or on a course or someone telling you, here's your voice. You got it by going out there and speaking to people.
And writing the book, actually. I think writing the book was probably the first very big pivotal thing, because I wrote the book and I was like, oh, I know a lot of stuff. The stuff I have is valuable, and it's always been within me, but writing that book and putting it down on paper and getting the feedback as well from people just made me really go, oh, I do have a voice. I do have stuff I want to say, and it is valuable and it is important. And I think, sometimes we need to do that. We need to get out there and go and speak, even though it terrifies us, or write the article or approach someone or do the things, because that's how we really find our genuine voice.
When did you get the first notion of writing a book?
I've always wanted to write a book, but it was coming to the conference,
one of our ones?
Like the KPI event. Yeah, coming to the one-day KPI event, meeting Andrew Griffiths, getting inspired.
And what was it? Do you remember the first time you sat down in front of a blank screen with the keyboard sort of sitting there taunting you?
I've always been a good writer, I guess. So articles, blogs, that kind of thing. It came pretty naturally to me, actually. I can, on a flight from Perth to Brisbane one time, I think I smashed out like 9,000 words. Like I can, if I'm in the zone, I can write, and this is, my current frustration in business at the moment that I'm working on is just building out my team and my management team so that I can have more space to speak and write and do those things, because just getting pulled into those non-essentials just is something I don't want to do.
And it happens to me, right? You build your influence, then your organization expands, you get sucked back into your business, that you need to sort it out so you can get back up and build your influence so your business expands and you get sucked back. It's this constant, influence creates growth creates complexity reduces your ability to influence. So it can often act as this, without the ability to manufacture demand and build brand, without the ability to organize the outgrowth of that effectively, can be counterproductive, and you end up just putting a huge amount of energy into this sort of sine wave of these ups and downs. And it's interesting, they've kind of got to both come together. Do you do anything in particular to get in the zone or did you, with the book Get Well Stay Well, do you put, like, did you have any protocols in place, any herbs, anything?
I think I had a 3-year-old at the time. So I would write at night or I would go away. So for me, writers retreats, and even if I'm creating stuff for the business, like a new product, or I'm writing or I'm smashing it, I'll go away. I think I just booked a trip to the Gold Coast for 3 days. My team will come for a couple of those days, some of my management team, and then I'll spend the last day myself just smashing out content. So if I'm in the zone, I'm in the zone. It's just when other stuff can get a bit distracting. And normally it's personal life stuff, if I'm honest. If my personal life has turbulence, then that then feeds into my creativity, of course, takes the energy out of it.
One of the things that I really, and I often mention when I'm talking about you, and kind of how you did what you did, is in the idea around product and productizing. I remember you talking to me, and I don't want to kind of take the words out of your mouth, but it was there was a realization that the old paradigm people had with their healthcare was very reactive, right? And this links to your vision, right, of changing the face of healthcare, I believe. It's very reactive. People would go to the doctor or the chiropractor or any kind of health professional when they were sick. And your idea was, well, what if they didn't do that? What if they came when they were healthy? And that led to this idea of a perpetual model. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that was a big part of the IP that allowed that catalyst to happen. And I'd love to unpick this in a bit of detail. So I'm curious about what came first, the chicken or the egg? Did that sort of concept develop itself as a result of the book or of the product or something else? Can you just unpack a bit of all that?
It's really interesting because one of our core fundamentals of naturopathy is first prevent, right? But actually people who are doing prevention are not our market because they don't have any motivation, right? And this is that conversation of changing the face of health. For that to happen, there needs to be some big systemic change, which we're definitely wanting to work towards drive. But my biggest thing is early intervention. So, actually getting people aware of addressing stuff when it first comes up rather than just letting it sit and suppressing. Or if they do have stuff going on, is really just we call these 3 levels of healing. So we call the discovery phase. We have discovery phase, the renewal phase, the healing phase, and then the arrival phase where you're at where you want to be, and it cycles through these 3 phases. So what I think people don't do well is the discovery phase. They go to the doctor, they're like, okay, well, you have PCOS, take your oral contraceptive pill, that's it. Okay, not why do I have PCOS? What do I need to do with my diet? How did I get here? What are the implications long-term and how do I do this? So one of the things actually in our IP that's one of our biggest assets is what we call journey mapping. So it's where am I at right now completely? What is the landscape of everything that's going on for you? And then how do we get from here to this arrival point, which doesn't necessarily mean I'm fixed or I'm healed, but I'm where I want to be, right? And I'm on the journey and I'm kind of making headway to where I'm going. So to get from A to B, there's a number of different things that can happen, but a lot of it is around psychology and really just training people for what's coming. Because what happens is inadvertently, they think that the wellness journey is linear. I'm just going to incrementally get better and better and better until I'm awesome. And then I'm fixed, I'm good. Right. But what actually happens is it's turbulent. It's up and down. They'll get better. They'll take 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And it's actually normal. Every single person nearly will go through the journey this way. But because we don't think it's normal, what happens is we reach a roadblock or we regress or something happens and we go, well, I'm regressing now, so I'm just going to give up. And weight loss is a really good example of that. It's very normal to plateau with weight loss. But people plateau and what do? Oh, maybe my diet's not working anymore. Maybe I need to do something different. And maybe you do, but maybe you're just plateauing right now and you need to just keep pushing through, right? So for us, really getting people to understand that journey, and the membership model that we have a lot of touch points to help people through that, and a lot of IP and assets to educate them on that. So we tell them at the start, at the 4th visit, which is always where people get treatment fatigue. So that's at about kind of the 7 to 8 week mark. People will inadvertently get treatment fatigue, which means I'm just overtaking supplements. Is this actually working? You know, I know that I'm sleeping better, my energy's better, but this one problem that I have still isn't solved, and they get all up in their head about it. We literally give them a handout about it. Hey, session 4, this is what's going on. They're like, oh yeah, I totally feel that way. So just these little touch points along the way help them to map out that journey so they get to the end and they get it. My biggest success with patients is when I interviewed patients for season 1 of The Shift. In the interviews, we always had written testimonials, video testimonials that were 2 to 3 minutes long, but I spent an hour with these patients, really picking apart their story, what's going on for you, and we put it into the series, but we also then released the patient series of the prolonged interviews. And it was heartwarming because all of a sudden I'm getting this feedback of these patients that have been coming for 18 months saying things like, you know what, I used to get a breakout and it used to just stress me out. You know, I didn't understand it, but now I get a pimple and I think, okay, Katie, what do I do? Oh, okay, last week you ate that. It was really stressful. That's why this happened. And I'm not stressed about it anymore. I understand the reasons behind what I'm doing, and they're self-diagnosing. And I was like, boom, this is what we're here for, right? To help people really understand what are the consequences of my action and what do I need? If something goes wrong, hold on, let's actually have a think about it and figure it out. And that's the thing. By the time patients have been seeing us for a year, 18 months, they can do that. They can decide when to take magnesium without our guidance. Yeah, I'm feeling a bit stressed today, so I'm just going to take this little bit of stuff. And that's where you want to get people, really.
Am I right to say that you went through I suppose like an upregulation around the level of rigor around diagnosing where people are at? Like I think I seem to remember that you weren't doing a lot when it came to really getting to the core of the patient's problem. And as you started doing that more, the patients became more engaged. They were interested in paying more money. Was that accurate? It's a long time ago.
We've always been really good at diagnosing, but what we weren't really good at was relaying that information in a way that the patient could really understand. So that's what we've become real masters in. So really getting them to understand that nitty gritty. And this is where, when they come in for their discovery and diagnosis, their initial appointment, there's 3 sections. It's just gathering information. It is a massive section, which is just diagnostic. We draw diagrams, we give them handouts. This is what's happening. But we then reiterate that information as we go through the journey, because people forget, why am I doing this? Why am I taking 6 supplements a day? Blindly. And if and placebo is massively powerful. If you can connect with the why of what you're doing, it's going to be more successful. We know that from research. So that's probably the part that we got better at mastering.
Yeah, because I mean, you hear me say a lot, like this idea that people can only pay for value they can recognize. And one of the things that I noticed you've done so well in your development of this stuff is you were already collecting all the data from the diagnostic, but you weren't communicating it well, so they couldn't recognize the value, because one of the big value drivers is, well, what's my problem that I'm going to fix? And so I remember as you started communicating that more effectively, well, I actually love it in your own words. What were the sort of differences you saw in either behavior or what you could charge or the types of products you could offer, or just any of the cascading consequences from just being more effective at communicating the problem?
Yeah, I think it's the nature of our programs is, I think part of it is time and length. The longer they're with us, the more they get it. They're going through the journey, they're experiencing it, we're feeding back to them, we're making them aware of changes. Like at the 3-quarter mark in their membership, we're going back to the initial consult. All right, this was then, this is now, what is the difference? People forget really, really quickly the changes. So you're right, but having that awareness and going, oh, actually, 80% of my problems aren't there anymore is really, really powerful for people. So for us, our retention is phenomenal. After a 4-month program, 90% of people will continue on with us, usually for another 6 months, 9 months minimum. And that, goes to prove for itself. They understand the journey, they know where they're going, they're clear, and they're getting results.
In terms of, you've been talking about the membership, etc. So can you try and explain, before you had a membership model, when it was sort of just business as usual, just quickly what that was? And then I'd love to unpack a bit of the evolution around your productization, because it's been pretty dramatic and just cool in terms of the way you've done it and packaged it. And by the way, if anyone goes to your website, what's your website?
theshiftclinic.com.
theshiftclinic.com. So again, if anyone's watching or listening to this, go check it out, because you'll see what I'm talking about. It's just gorgeous, right? Katherine and her team just put it together so damn well. Can you explain a bit of the before and the transition through productizing?
So the traditional naturopathic or any therapist model, really, doctor, psychologist, acupuncture, whatever it is that you go in and you have your initial assessment, and then we'll see you in 2 weeks. We'll see you in 2 weeks. We'll see you in 4 weeks. We'll see you in 3 weeks. And it just kind of maps out that way. You might have some people that'll pre-book stuff ahead. Okay, we're going to need fortnightly for 3 weeks. We'll do that. But that's really the extent of it. So for us, we kind of had to make that decision and go, well, wellness is a journey. It takes time. We want to choose with people that want to go the distance, okay? Because there are going to be people that have a few sessions, get out of pain, and then that's enough for them. And then they'll be back in 6 months or back in 12 months. So we started off with doing packages, actually. We went, okay, well, we're going to need to see people 6 or 8 times. We'll do a package of 8 sessions. We'll sell it for X amount. I think we were even discounting at the time, which we don't do now. But, we did a discount. People prepay, and then they have those packages, and then they can utilize them. And the progression to the membership came because I wanted to make it that it wasn't about the session. It was about the outcome. And the only way that I could see that being the case was to really take it away from that per session cost. We messed it up at the start, actually. We did these unlimited memberships that included unlimited everything, completely changed everyone's behavior, the practitioner's behavior, the patient's behavior. I didn't expect it to happen, and I didn't monitor it very closely. So that was another business fail or learning. But
what happened? What happened with the unlimited? Because I remember when you did that
everyone
the first
just
time.
did more. Yeah, everyone just did more. And the practice, they're like, all right, it's unlimited, so let's just go unlimited. They just got over-serviced, which meant that we just had no profitability. We even did unlimited supplements at the time too. It's like, oh, hold on, because I based my modeling. I did research. What are we charging? What are people doing on average? How many sessions are they having? And it just blew out by about 30% to what my modeling was, which is our profit. So that was the really big learning. And the learning was that I launched it like I used to. And my team used to give me a lot of shit about this because I'm very quick. I'm like, all right, we're going to create this and it's out tomorrow. Let's just make it happen. But what I learned over the years was that didn't really work that well when you didn't fix it at the marketing level, at the reception level, so everybody was aware of what was happening. I don't do that anymore much, sometimes a little bit every now and then.
Just enough to keep everyone on their toes. So how did you refine it from there? Because I remember when you did that and the insight was, yeah, people were doing it more, but people were staying as well. And that was a shift, I think, in your mind. It's like, oh, okay, so we got half of it right.
Part of the reason for the memberships was both for retention and patients actually getting results, that we didn't want to work with people that weren't going to get results because they just didn't hang around for long enough. But it was also to do with our team as well. You know, if a team member left, it doesn't affect our ecosystem. Patients are still there. They're getting care. They'll just see one of the other naturopaths that are on the team, which was really massive as well, because there's a lot of kind of stuff in our industry where people maybe aren't so honorable when it comes to coming to work in a clinic. You know, they've got ulterior motives. They'll come in, they'll leave, patients will follow them, stuff like that. You know, there's a massive amount of work that goes into retaining patients and marketing and doing all of that stuff. So that was definitely on my radar. But the development of it just happened through trial and error. For myself, I wasn't seeing a lot of clients, but when we launched the memberships 5 years ago now, I think, I went back in, I was like, I need to actually be seeing these patients and seeing what the response is and how they're doing, etc. So it took a couple of years to really refine it and figure out, okay, what do they need? What are the things that we're offering them that are costing us money that really don't make any difference? What are the things that could add value without us adding more time? So we've got a really robust online membership hub now that they can go in and watch webinars and do stuff like that. You know, when COVID hit, we were doing 52 workshops a year in the clinic. So these workshops would be available for members to come, but also, you know, for external people for marketing. It's just too much. It's like one a week on average. Crazy. You know, so we still do a couple a month in the clinic, but yeah, it's just the model has changed. You know, it's just figuring out how do we get them the results, but also we need to be profitable. You know, we can't just build in all of this extra stuff because it is a lot of work. And a lot of other naturopaths are like, yeah, I want to do membership. Like, you really need to think about the profitability of it and work it out and the extra hours that it's going to take. You know, our members, we do an onboarding appointment with our client care manager. You know, that's another cost to us, but that just gets them really set and make sure they're set up with all their stuff. So there's a lot more to it than you would think. And it's constant evolution. You know, even when I go away to the Gold Coast in a few weeks, it'll be, all right, let's review, let's make sure things are working well. How do we improve it? We have a team retreat every quarter. We're looking then what's working, what's not working. So we're pretty agile. We're always looking at improving things.
And you've also, throughout this whole, you know, the book and the product and kind of building that ecosystem, you've also been developing your profile the whole way. You know, and again, from someone who was kind of hiding behind the business and yet having this kind of quasi satellite profile sort of site sitting out there on the other side, like how did that evolve? Can you remember some of the connection points where you started connecting your face to the business and seeing that making a difference?
Yeah, it's pretty immediate, actually. So as soon as I started upping my media and my speak, it fed right back in, you know, and we, as I said, we rebranded to Shift a few years ago. And then only last year I redid my personal branding so it matched that. But it's been COVID, like pre-COVID. In March 2019, I was in Orlando speaking at a podcasting conference with 3,000 people, right? And that's when COVID hit. And then I went to Seattle and the whole city was on lockdown. And we were like, am I going to get home? What am I going to do? And so I was pretty active with my profile and my speaking and doing stuff at that point. And then COVID hit. And as you said, I got sucked back into the business. Plus there were no events. So anything that I had in the calendar got completely cancelled. And it's really only now where I'm kind of coming out of my cave and going, oh God, I really want to get back out and start speaking and doing stuff and that side of things. So that's my focus for 2022 actually, is to just, you know, really, because does take a lot of energy to do that. You know, I'm about to hire an EA PR person for the first time ever. Normally it's me that's driving it or my assistant. So that'll be a really big move for us as well.
Did writing the book, like how did writing the book affect the way in which you communicated either as a speaker or in the media? Were you a comfortable speaker beforehand? Did it change it?
I built my business to begin with on doing workshops, PCOS, endometriosis, fertility. I used to go and put up little flyers at bus stops. So by the time I was kind of 4 or 5 years in, I was comfortable, but not on big stages, right? It's just different levels of stuff. Now I could get on any stage and I'd be like a bit nervous, but if I knew my stuff, I wouldn't have a problem with it. I could jump up there and talk for half an hour on anything that I'm an expert in without that side of things. But writing the book, I think the biggest thing was just that credibility. You know, I just more yeses. You know, I got it. Yeah, you forget how much you were doing. I had a weekly slot on a radio show that I used to do that I loved. That was amazing. That then turned into a sports channel, so that kind of fizzled out. But I was doing quite a lot.
What would you say if you could go back, if you were to look back over your sort of journey in developing it, if you could go back and give yourself some advice at a particular time, you almost go and whisper in your ear, when would you go back to and what would you say?
The biggest, I think, issue that I've had in my business has been people management, and both from a cultural perspective, and that comes back down to pitch and really brand and understanding that, but really even just looking at stuff and being aware of it. You know, I was so busy and I wasn't in my business the way that I should have been, you know, and I think it's a skill as well, managing that stuff and realizing that stuff. But yeah, that's probably the biggest piece of advice. And I've always had business advisors and coaches and different stuff going on. But, you know, there's a point where I went, if we're going to hire this new person or do this, how do we manage them? How do we make sure they're effective? How do we not make sure people are working for 12 months and not making any money, and then all of a sudden we're in tax debt because of that, which has happened in the past. So I think for me, going back and having some of those conversations would have been what would have been valuable.
How do you manage team and culture now?
In a number of ways. One of them is being really clear on brand and onboarding as well. So part of it is our recruitment process. You know, this is who we are. These are our values. So when we're recruiting people, we're really looking for that values alignment. What is the proof that they're living that? You know, what are they doing? So we've got a number of questions and different processes that we work through. So we worked really hard on onboarding, which has probably been the biggest thing because we're getting the right people. Part of it is just being really clear on our messaging. This is who we are. This is what we're here to achieve. You know, for me, really getting them on the boat to go, well, do you want to change the face of health? We do. Let's do it together. You know, let's actually create some energy around that. And then the other one is doing team retreats offsite every quarter. We did a bit less last year with COVID and stuff, but once a quarter, taking the whole team off site and just spending a day. And that serves a couple of purposes. One of it is I need to plan that day, which makes me really clear on what are we doing? What are we up to? What are we planning? What do they need? And then the other one is just giving them space to really have feedback, get deeper on the concepts. So every team retreat, we're going over values. We're talking about how we communicate at shift. We're talking about solving problems. And that's, I think, been really the biggest thing, definitely.
Yeah, I love it. How was COVID for you? You know, you mentioned you snuck back into the country, and you know, but obviously, you know, a big part of your business at the time was the clinic.
At the time, I wasn't seeing any clients. So since the launch of season 1, I was like, I can't do everything to everyone. And I got back, was in self-isolation for 2 weeks and putting out massive fires. So I got a phone call at the airport, one of my team members just completely freaking out. One of them moved to the country, was like, I you know, COVID, like just crazy stuff, right? And I didn't know anything was wrong until I got on the phone to my receptionist and she's crying and I'm in the airport. I'm like, whoa. And it was really hard because I couldn't go in and see them, right? I'm in self-isolation. I couldn't just go in and go, let's have a meeting. Let's actually do this. We had to do everything over Zoom, which was sucky as well. And then because this team member left and moved to the country, suddenly I'm seeing 30 clients a week, you know, from home and dealing with all this stuff. So it was a lot. It was the best thing that happened to our business in a way that it got rid of some people that didn't values align that I wasn't aware of, right? Until this stuff happens and then it brings out the best and the worst of people, etc. So that was definitely beneficial. But for us, like we lost acupuncture, we lost massage, which is a big part of our Brisbane clinic. And then it just was trying to maintain the energy of the team, because when people are leaving and taking off to the country and we're closing down the acupuncture department, like just trying to maintain their energy and let them know that everything will be okay was a really big part of it. So it was a good exercise in leadership, that's for sure. And for us, it really made us focus on, well, what can we do? We can do virtual. We can do naturopathy from anywhere in the world. We can post stuff. We can do that. And we really honed in on that. And then we started doing just working on our online funnels, doing challenges. So when I was talking about doing stuff like on the fly, when I got back from Seattle, I was like, it's lockdown. Everyone's in lockdown. Let's do a lockdown challenge. All right, when are we going to launch it? All right, 3 days time. So we put together this lockdown survival challenge, completely free. We weren't really even selling anything in the group, brought together a heap of different experts, get them to come in the group. We had 1,600 people join it and did that. So, and then we weren't selling anything, but then those people are in our funnel and experiencing our stuff and doing our things as well. I really feel that next year for us will be massive for healthcare. I feel like people are going to come out of their caves. They're going to go, all right, what happened? We're in this new reality. Wow, I've put on 5 kilos. I'm not looking after myself. I've put myself backwards. And people are going to be wanting to really get their health and life together, so we'll be there.
It's pretty awesome how you were able to, because you mentioned to me again in the green room that you kind of, your revenue was really stable over COVID. So while the clinic dropped, the digital went up and compensated for it. Do you see a plan for digital moving forward? Because I can imagine that there's going to be like something that is lost, of course, in translation via Zoom, where you can't see the whites of their eyeballs, if that makes sense. And yet there seems to be so much value in being able to share what to people in regions that don't have naturopaths.
Yeah, and I think as we were saying before we jumped on as well, is we did have a regional health program up in, regional Queensland and stuff like that, which stopped pre-COVID too. But I think for us, I would say about 90% of results they would get doing virtual. And for us, it's naturopathy, it's counselling, it's psychotherapy, it's hypnotherapy, it's things that we can do online. And for people that can't come into the Brisbane clinic or are in somewhere in remote, Texas, where they don't have natural therapies and they don't have a local clinic, it's invaluable, and all of a sudden the culture's changed around it to the point where in Brisbane, we kind of want people to come back in. If I've got 8 clients in a day, 4 of them are probably virtual and 3 of them are probably living in Brisbane. But they're just used to that. Like, oh, I'll just do a phone, or I'll just do a whatever. Smashed our retail sales, definitely. Got a shop. So all of those little things. But yeah, people's perception around online consults have changed. That's how they're seeing their doctor. That's how they're doing it. And I think from a larger public health perspective, it's fantastic. Someone that's in country Queensland can now access a specialist, and have an appointment with a specialist rather than flying into Brisbane and doing a 3-day trip just to be able for someone to have a look at their liver or whatever it is. So It's opened up definitely some new frontiers.
And I think it's like, even though the technology was available, it's almost like the extended COVID kind of period just normalized it for everyone, that it's like, okay, we can do stuff by Zoom. And so it's just created this augmented
Totally. But also in Australia, you couldn't use a Medicare rebate for a virtual consult.
Oh, really?
Now.
Yeah.
Okay. So you could not see your doctor via online until now, which is just insane.
Yeah, well, silver lining.
Old school, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So I'd love to shift gears, because, you've just done so well, obviously, with the business. God, we've just gone through the world's most significant potentially health crisis in a long time, and potentially it's brought that to the forefront of more people. I know I speak to a lot of people. They've been inside a lot, been out of the sun a lot. They haven't been eating as well as they probably should be, because they're eating packaged foods and shit because they just don't want to go outside to the shops to get the clean, healthy stuff, and running businesses and the stress of all that, etc. What have you found with working with, do you often work with business owners that are dealing with that sort of stuff, and do you find they have a different set of problems and needs to the rest of the world?
I think 95% of people are struggling in some way, right? Whether it's because they're at home and they've lost that human connection, whether it's that they've lost all of their lifelines. For the normal people, their lifelines is, okay, well, once a week I catch up with my sister for coffee, and then I go for a walk along the thing, and then I go to my gym and connect with people there, and I've got that, and then I have my work colleagues, and on a Friday afternoon we have drinks. Like, all of these little tiny things really add up to somebody's quality of life. So for us, we do work with a lot of business owners and just humans. And on some level, everyone is affected. It might be because of job instability, or fears around, what's going to happen with COVID stuff, with lockdowns and mandates. And there's a level of uncertainty, that we can't do what we used to do. The other really big one is people being isolated from their family overseas, but interstate as well, not being able to connect and have that. I think my PA, her mum hasn't seen her son for 3 years, because she was due for the trip, and then COVID hit, and now it's been 2 years. She's in Melbourne, we're in Queensland, and he's now 4 years old, so that's just time you're not going to get back. So I think there's been a lot of different things, and I've seen some pretty horrific things like people's, mum dying overseas and not being able to get home, and just the whole process of trying to get through those hoops. So it's been a massively stressful.
Sarah's auntie died alone. We couldn't get to her. It was gutting. All her family was in New South Wales. She was in Melbourne in the middle of it. Died alone, and it broke Sarah. It was the most heartbreaking thing, and and it really brought this whole situation to a real personal level, to see that, where all of. And I understand, right? Like, COVID's a real thing, and it's dangerous, and it's killing people. And I was talking to Sarah Hunstead, who's part, Sarah, whose partner runs the Royal Children's Hospital, and she was talking like, we've never seen anything like this before. It's crazy. I got another mate, Jeremy, in the ex-SAS medic, who's talking to doctors in the US, and they're like, 100 people come in with COVID and 60 of them are going to die. And, like, you're hearing this stuff, and it's like, okay, there's a problem here. But then you see all these unintended consequences of these kind of lockdowns that I don't know. I don't watch a lot of the media because I always felt like it was mostly silly bullshit anyway. But it doesn't seem like there's a nuanced conversation around this at all.
And this is the thing. This is where many things can be right at the same time, right? And I think this is where the conversation goes wrong, because yes, COVID's dangerous and it kills people. Yes, the consequence of lockdown and all of the restrictions also really, it kills people, right? And my biggest thing is, and I'll explain that, and rather than being over dramatic, but my thing is, I'm changing the face of health. We are already in a health crisis before COVID, right? 82% of Australians are going to die of a chronic disease, a chronic, lifelong, preventable illness, mostly, right? So things like cancer, cardiovascular disease, heart disease, Alzheimer's and dementia, asthma, autoimmune disease. These are the things that ultimately will kill the majority of us, and most of them are preventable. We know that from science, right? Including cancers. We know that things like alcohol, smoking, eating processed foods, etc., increases cancer risk, stress, etc. So we already have this information. We also know that the majority of people that do get taken out by COVID do have comorbidities, right? Which are the things that we're already ill with. So for me, this is a big wake-up call to go, do you know what? There's always going to be things like COVID that come along. In my lifetime, I'm sure there's going to be another one for sure. In my daughter's lifetime, definitely. This is a call to arms to go, we need to improve the robustness of our population health. And how do we do that? We need to stop doing all the shit that's put us in this situation, right? Because when you look at the statistics and where things are going, it's getting worse on all levels. Cancer is going up, autoimmune disease is going up, allergies, crazy on the rise, anaphylactic allergies, crazily on the rise, gut issues, all kinds of things. Right. So, and this is what I mean by, yes, COVID will kill people, but so will isolation. We're going to have things like suicide, but also if you put on an extra 5 kilos, right? So imagine this, you're stress snacking. I've been there during lockdown. Like, it's what do? You're bored, you're eating more than usual. You're not getting out and exercising. You've got a different routine, whatever it is. You put on an extra 5 kilos, that can be incredibly difficult to lose. right? That 5 kilograms will sit around your organs. It's going to increase your risk of cardiovascular disease. It's going to increase your risk of all of those comorbidities I talked about over time. So for some people, they're never going to lose that. Okay, especially women in their midlife, so women who are perimenopausal, so leading into their 40s, 50s, 60s, it is incredibly difficult for them to shift weight, especially if they don't have the resources and tools. So what we're going to find is, yes, there's going to be consequences, and some of it we won't even know for another 10 to 20 years when people are in that zone and they have this extra weight or they have these extra issues that they didn't before, or that they've just had to imagine being in Melbourne, for 18 months basically on lockdown nearly the entire time. Yes, you can go for a walk once a day, but what if that's not your thing? What if your thing was, doing yoga and getting into your routine? How long is it going to take you to re-establish that habit? How long is it going to take you to break all the bad habits that you've made in the meantime and to get back to where you need to be? And will it be 100%? And I think for a lot of people, it won't. We're going to notice that there's going to be a knock-on effect of this. So, yeah, that's how I see it. And for me, I'm always looking at what is the landscape of everything, right? So for my patients, what is the landscape of your entire health? What are you eating? How are you sleeping? What's your relationships like? How much sunshine are you getting? Are you getting everything that you need? But on the bigger public health landscape, it's like, well, how do we prevent deaths? By improving population health. How do we improve population health? By eating the right food, by getting sunshine, by acknowledging that we're just overly stressed and being able to deal with it, by working on emotions and past trauma is a massive part of that, which then drives all the other behaviors like stress and eating and doing all the other stuff. And it's movement, so, and these are the things that we don't have. And then we could talk about environmental toxicity for hours as well, which is another environmental factor. So for me, when I'm looking at how do we come out of this, it's like, how do you create an environment for healing for yourself, right? And we talk to this about our patients, right? Your body will heal itself if it has the right environment. And the environment is, what am I eating? What am I exposed to? What are my levels of stress? How am I sleeping? What is the input from the environment into my body that's allowing it to do what it needs to do, which is to heal itself? So will people have the awareness of creating that for themselves to get out of this is the question.
Well, I mean, this is kind of where I go with this, right? Because nothing you're talking about is voodoo, right? It's all scientifically large scale. Like it's not uncertain whether or not all the conditions that you're talking about, heart condition, etc., are metabolic issues, right? They're a result of what we put into our bodies consciously or unconsciously. They're not random effects. I mean, there'll be some, but by and large, right? By and large. So why do you think that there's just no conversation? Because I remember hearing an early study, and the studies are like, seem to be able to be bought and paid for these days. So again, I don't try and get too deep into the rabbit hole of trying to outstudy, other people's opinions around this stuff. But that said, there was a study that I came across that supported my values that said, of all of the people, and it was a large study, but of all the people that were diagnosed with COVID, that had adequate or above average, average or above average levels of vitamin D, zinc, and some other, basic biomarkers that could be developed and improved simply through healthy lifestyle choices, the risk of hospitalization and death dropped to 0. And this was like a big sample size. I mean, big, I don't know, it's like 10,000 or something like that. Crickets. I was down some rabbit hole somewhere, but you wouldn't hear anything like that in the sort of the mainstream media. I mean, you don't even hear them mention zinc or vitamin D, which is quite universally considered, a major, not only prophylactic, but way of minimizing effects as far as I can tell. Why is this not being talked about from your perspective?
I'm going to say something controversial, and probably that'll get taken out of context and get me trolled in future. However, it needs to be said, and that is that the way that we're managing COVID is a symptom of how we manage the healthcare system in general. It's reactive, it's single-minded, it's putting it in a freaking silo, and it's putting everything on a vaccine, right? It's like, that's the decision. Well, we need a vaccine. Like, that's the only way we're going to get out of this. Really? Is it? Yes, vaccines have helped us get out of things like polio and other stuff, but it's pretty clear from the data now that the vaccine is not a silver bullet, and it's not the only way we're going to get out. And you're right, there's massive research on nutrients. There's research on certain herbal medicines and drugs, might I add. There's actually quite a robust level of research of drugs that can treat COVID, but in a lot of countries, they're not being used. So this is not a conspiracy theory, right? You've got mainstream doctors that are talking about this stuff. So, and this is where, do I think that the vaccine is necessary? Yeah, like if it works and it prevents deaths, fine, go for it. But realize that, this is a symptom of our population health. So what about a plan B? That'd be good. What if the vaccine doesn't work? Because at the moment, it's looking like, if you're looking at countries like Singapore, the UK, the infection rates are the same. And yes, less people are dying, but they're still dying. And if the aim is health, then how do we stop that? Okay, so maybe in addition to taking your double dose of vaccine and your boosters and doing all of that, vitamin D is cheap. It's such a cheap intervention. There's no side effects. It's very, very safe for people to take a dose of vitamin D every day. Why not promote that? What is the harm of that? Does it detract from the message? Is it that people can't handle too many messages? Do the vaccine, take vitamin D, do the stuff. Is that why? I don't know. But certainly I agree with you. There's not a good conversation. And this could be said for anything though. Look at cardiovascular disease. It's great for that? Fish oil. It's great for that? Exercise. It's great for that? Not eating sugar. And like, I think we were talking about the food pyramid earlier. It's like these kind of concepts that we're told are healthy for us may not be. So if we're following the science, why can't we do it across the board? Why can't we help and better ourselves?
There seems to be a bias towards anything that has the ability to provide, health, wellness over the long term. And like what your whole thing was about, right? Instead of it being reactive, it's proactive. Most of that stuff is cheap or free, right? Sunlight, fresh water, exercise, vitamin D, zinc, some magnesium, things of that nature. The great hormone cascades that come from, making love, from exercising, from, going for a swim in a cold lake, all these sorts of things that seem to cause us to be able to be resilient and have our ancestors be resilient over millennia to allow us to get where we're here now. It seems that there's a lot of people that, and just ordinary people, like business owners, people going like not kind of big doctors or anything like that tend to just sort of dismiss that stuff. And the stuff that we tend to go for is the stuff that has a huge profit incentive behind it.
Yeah. And it's also the quick fix. We've been conditioned that we want quick fixes. We just want this done, So yeah, I can go get my vaccine, or I can cut the sugar out of my diet and exercise and deal with stress and lose some weight. And this is where I was speaking to my team about it the other day. For naturopathy, it's the hardest sell, right? Because we're the ones who are making you do work. We're like, you're going to have to work on your diet and look at your shit and, do all this stuff. Whereas someone comes in for acupuncture, it's passive. They sit on the bed, they have their treatment for an hour and they leave. And we spoke about this, it's really interesting and even in referral rates, like we get good referrals, but it's much easier for someone to go and get acupuncture because you're going to feel good immediately. Not then go and see this naturopath. I'm feeling really good, but they're going to make you do X, Y, Z
for 6 months.
To get
results. It'll radically change your life, but you're going to have to do it for 6 months. I don't want to stay too deep in the COVID rabbit hole, but one thing I'm curious from your perspective of is I've always just wished, and instead of it being a vaccine or get fit and healthy, just get the vaccine and get fit and healthy and this, that, and the other, but it's not even that. And all the data seems to be vaccinated, unvaccinated on the population level, where it's like deaths and hospitalizations, etc. Are you seeing from any of your people or any of your sources, are you seeing anything around the effect of COVID on groups of people that are in fact healthy, that have taken responsibility for their health, that have, strong markers in all those areas? And it's like, okay, at the level of population, which are, at the level of population where sugar eating, fast food eating, Coke drinking, people, right? It's a sort of a fast food or at least processed food nation. And so we could assume that at the population level, there's a lower level of health in certain subgroups. Are you aware of any commentary around any kind of research that's in any way credible or a large enough sample size that sort of says vaccine versus unvaccine of people that are in peak health?
No, I haven't seen it. And it's because I've been looking into the research quite a bit, but there's a lot of cherry picking of data to support arguments.
Anyone's argument.
So and on both sides,
Totally.
it's really interesting. Certainly, the data does support that anyone can die from COVID. You do get young, healthy people dying, etc. But the majority of people do have comorbidities of some kind, and the majority are in that higher risk bracket, So I don't know. It's one of those things where I don't think we'll know really until this is over, if it's ever over, what that's showing. And I guess the vaccination is I didn't expect every single country to do it actually, but they are, so that we don't really know what happens. We do know that from the research that I've been reading recently, that natural immunity to COVID works better than vaccine immunity. But also if you're not vaccinated, you could die more easily. So there's just all these different factors,
Yeah.
I think what's really important from this conversation is what you said, Glenn, is this and this is what we do naturopathically. We don't go, all right, you've got a gut problem, let's just treat the gut. No, we go, let's treat the gut and then let's look at your nervous system, because stress is turning off your stomach acid and your hydrochloric acid and your enzymes and actually causing you to have IBS and issues. So we need to work on the nervous system. Otherwise, we're not going to heal the gut, right? And in the meantime, because you're so stressed, the immune system is now implicated. You're starting to get allergic reactions to stuff. Let's address the immunity too. And we're taking this approach where we're using multiple touch points. So why not? Why not use vitamin D because it's a regulator of the immune system? Why not take turmeric because it's anti-inflammatory? Why not cut sugar out of your diet because we know that that's highly inflammatory? There's things that we can do up and beyond. And for us in Queensland, we haven't had much COVID. I've had one patient with COVID, in the last couple of years, but when the borders open and everything, and this is going to be the reality, we've got protocols and we've got stuff, but we're not really going to know how people are responding until that happens.
What do you see as, to sort of bring us home, if you could wave your magic wand around the healthcare system, right, from a macro perspective, what would you say would be some of the initial shifts? And if I can frame this just a little more, I'm becoming a combination of suspicious and aware that no shifts are ever that are going to be really truly meaningful and beneficial for populations. Genuine health, wellness, connection, love, community. Doesn't feel like that is ever going to come from the top down, right? I can't see a single example where a government policy or a big corporate policy has led to more genuine well-being at a grassroots level. And so given that our healthcare system and so many other systems that don't seem to really serve the humanity in people seem broken, how does this systemically locked in system of big business, big pharma, big medicine, big government, big industry, locked all the way down to, the doctors and the institutions, etc. It's this big sort of institutionalized stack that's kind of been maturing over 150 years. And, you can look at that anywhere. You can look at the education system and people have got the same issues. You can look at the financial system. It's like there are all these stacked systems that seem ossified and extractive of, well-being. From a health perspective, certainly from a business owner that's listening to this going, yeah, I kind of generally agree with all of that, but what are you going to do?
I did a lot of research on this and spoke to a lot of people when I did my interviews for season 1 of The Shift. So we have an episode called Dysfunction in the Industry We Call Health. And we go pretty deep on this. And, it's not just me. So as a naturopath, I can't come out and go, I can, but it doesn't have as much credibility as a doctor that's been in the system. I can't come out and go, the medical system's broken without having, some scrutiny with that. Just fair enough. One person that comes to mind is Dr. William Davis, who's the author of Wheat Belly, but he's a cardiologist, traditional cardiologist, used to train other cardiologists in stuff as well. And his opinion was, I said, William, when do you think this will change? He said, our generation has to die. Basically, it'll be the new doctors that come up, because it's just the paradigms are so stuck. Medical school is like an indoctrination, right? It's and you speak to different doctors that have made that transition into the integrative zone, and they all say it. They're like, yeah, like it's, if you go outside of that box, you are shunned. I had a friend of mine who's an integrative doctor who got hate mail for practicing nutrition, basically. And everything we know about nutrition, by the way, is based on research. The only reason we know that there's vitamin C in citrus is from research. The only reason we know how much we need is from research. Everything about nutrition is from research, right? And nutritional therapy. So it's just really confounding. Another comment was made that it takes 17 years for new translational research to make it through into mainstream. So when I was studying naturopathy 15 years ago, we were talking about the microbiome. Dysbiosis, we called it. We talked about weed, seed, and feeding, which is a naturopathic term for trying to modify the microbiome using probiotics, using different things. That's 15 years ago. And now it's starting to be talked about by doctors, right? Only in this last couple of years, gut health, microbiome, that research has been around for 15 years. And yes, we have a lot more of it, but we've known about it for a very long time. So this is part of the problem, is just speed, and you're right, because everything's institutionalized, and the people who are making the decisions about this, what is their motivation? Because the people who are like CEOs of big pharma, they're not there because they want to change the face of health. They're not there because they have a passion for helping people. Sorry, but they're not. You look at history and you look at stuff that's happened, and that's just really not what's occurring. So, yeah, I've got some opinions about it for sure, and I can see it. And America's a lot worse. Going to the US was just eye-opening, and having conversations with them and what's going on with policy and stuff. And Australia is a version of that. We're just a little bit less wild west. But the other difference is in the US, doctors can speak out because they have their whole constitutional rights thing going on, right? So they do say stuff, whereas in Australia, really rare to even find an integrative specialist. And that's why I went to the US originally. I'm like, there aren't any experts here that I actually want to speak to. Not many, at least. It's kind of interesting.
But it's just the fact that doctors aren't allowed to speak, like they would lose their license if they speak negatively about certain pharmaceutical products.
Not even. So there was a doctor here in Brisbane that lost his medical license for doing too many tests on a certain thing that was fringe. It might have been Pyrrole disorder or something, a functional medicine type concept. So because he wasn't working in the constructs of the medical model, he literally lost his medical license. I think it took him like a year to get back. There was a whole thing about it. So you see that, and you can see why there's fear. Even Medicare. So vitamin D is a really good example. We've spoken about vitamin D a lot, but maybe 5 years ago, Medicare went, too many vitamin D tests. You've got to stop, you've got to cut it. So it's really difficult to get a doctor to test a patient for vitamin D status. Whereas there's hundreds, if there's one nutrient besides fish oils, probably vitamin D has the most robust research for nearly every single health condition. You search something, likely vitamin D deficiency will make you more likely to get it. Autoimmune stuff, cardiovascular, memory, Alzheimer's, COVID.
So this is where,
so it's just crazy.
So I'd love your opinion, right? Because this is where you start getting into the realm of it's hard not to consider the conspiracy theories, right? Because it's like, why would they do that, right? Like I just like to assume that people are good and that people are genuinely doing good things and they're not nefarious and there's not actually a bunch of, old men in hoods creating evil in the world, right? But it's like, can you think of a non-fucked up reason why Medicare would limit the amount of tests for such a important?
Do you know what? I don't think that particular thing was particularly evil. I think it's just a poor misunderstanding of them. This is what they do. There's no research, but they don't go and look for research, right? There's this whole thing of, that's not evidence-based. That's not gold standard. And it's cost saving, basically. It's the government going, we're spending too much money on this. Yes, people are paying their Medicare levies and stuff, but it's trying to cut costs because every test that doctor orders, its bulk bill will cost the government that money. So it is about trying to cut costs. But ultimately, you cut costs, that person's deficient in vitamin D, and I've seen vitamin Ds that are low enough to give people osteoporosis. what happens then when they get cancer, which is associated with low vitamin D? What happens when they, have autoimmune? There's no foresight. It's all like, how do we save money this quarter? How do we save money this year in this term of government? There's no real foresight of going, okay, well, maybe prevention might be good since 82% of us are dying of chronic diseases. Maybe we could, in 20, 30 years' time, reduce the size of our cardiovascular wards in hospitals and stop as many stents from going in and that kind of thing. But they don't. It's very here and now. I guess another one is weight loss surgery is another really big example of that, and I've just seen so much damage from this, from different patients and different people I know where they have weight and they're like, well, if we cut out the stomach, which is what they do. So they literally take the stomach, chop it at the top, chop it at the bottom, join it together. It's called a gastric bypass. And you don't have a stomach anymore. Therefore, you can't really hold a lot of food. You're eating small amounts of food. You don't have a stomach. So yeah, you might lose weight temporarily, but if the weight gain is from emotional eating, it's from other stuff, it's from inflammation, etc. People end up putting the weight back on, but now they don't have a stomach. So now they don't have stomach acid, which means they're constantly deficient in iron, etc., etc., etc. And this is that very reductionistic point of view that it's just, how do we heal someone? Not by taking away an organ. It's
yes. You would think that would be step one. Let's not cut anything out of them.
Keep all of the body parts in the body.
In the body.
Step one. But yeah, there's a lot of dysfunction in our health industry, and this is why we're sick. If there wasn't dysfunction in the industry, we wouldn't be sick. Think about how many people that have chronic health issues. By the time we're 50, I think it's something like 60% of people will have 2 chronic health issues. And it compounds. One begets another, begets another. So as soon as you get diagnosed with one, you're on the train. By the time you're 70, you now have diabetes, cardiovascular disease, chronic sinusitis, eczema, whatever it is. All these different issues that confound if you don't do anything about it.
So as you know, I moved to Jindabyne just before the first lockdown hit in Sydney, right? So for everyone else, Jindabyne is in the Snowy Mountains in Australia. It's kind of little holiday town, and frankly, through most of COVID, totally deserted in the middle of a wilderness wonderland, which is awesome. But I've got a couple of mates now that have big farms. Well, I say big farms, many thousands of acres, so they're not super farms, but still going out and helping. And I'm like, oh yeah, I'll learn. I like learning new stuff, and just seeing the amount of chemicals and fertilizers and pesticides and all this sort of stuff that they are pouring onto the land. And I've since met a whole bunch of the other side of the camp, which is the regen agriculture, permaculture type people that have a total, like they're the naturopaths of growing food almost, as opposed to, the industrialized agriculture way of growing food, which just, from what I'm learning, just kills soil dead. And therefore the plants are less nutritious. But he was telling me about it. He's like, look, we've been putting this stuff on for years, but then the animals started getting sicker. So then we've got to give the sheep and the cows these vaccines and these antibiotics to stop them getting sick. And they only really started getting sick after we started using the pesticides and the herbicides and the fungicides and sort of all this sort of stuff. And it's so like in our whole food system as well, we've seen to have all of these chemicals being injected at all levels, from the soil and the plants and their DNA to the stuff on top, to the animals, etc. To what degree, I guess, are you dialed into the effects of that, I guess, institutionalized food system and how that transfers into a lot of the conditions that you were talking about? Because it seems like, we put chemicals in the soil, that makes the animals sick. We have to then put chemicals into the animals to try and keep them alive. And then, we've also got humans getting sick for all sorts of weird things that are coming out of nowhere that we can't really explain. So, let's layer them up with more chemicals, and let's mandate that, because it'd be good to lock in this whole system that seems to be working so well for us. There seems to be this big causal link that almost, I watched a documentary, which I highly recommend for anyone that hasn't seen it, is Kiss the Ground, just all about soil. And it was quite mind-blowing in terms of maybe that's where it all sort of starts, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's my wheelhouse. So in Get Well, Stay Well, my book, which was now 6 years ago, I think, released, maybe 7, I researched toxins, right? It's in there. There's a chapter on it, etc. And then when I did season 2 of The Shift, and season 1, but more so season 2, because we were looking at women's health, fertility, thyroid, and most of these chemicals are endocrine disrupting chemicals, EDCs. So what they do is they come in, they bind or disrupt the receptor function, they increase hormones, they mess with our hormones massively. So I went on a research rabbit hole, and compared to 6 years ago, there is like 100 times more research in this area, massive, especially in the area of hormones, fertility, and also cognition too. So there's an episode in season 2 on this called EDCs, endocrine disrupting chemicals, but we look at the increase of their use. Also, how persistent are they in the environment? So when you've got different chemicals, they have different half-lives in your body, in the environment. So something like BPA from plastics, for example, which is an endocrine disruptor, it leaves your body pretty quickly. You get rid of plastics, it's not there for too much longer. The effect might be there, but the plastic toxin isn't, right? If you look at something like pesticides, they've got a half-life of anywhere between 7, 10, 15 years, right? And a half-life is the amount of time that it takes half of that to leave your body. So let's say, for instance, that you're consuming foods with DDT, which you are still, even though it's been banned since the 70s because it's a persistent organic pollutant. That level that you're increasing will be in your body until you die at some level, right? Except that you're not just having one exposure. Every single day you're having exposure to thousands of different chemicals, right? And they're micro exposures. And one of them on their own probably wouldn't really do you all that much harm. But what's happening is you're eating your lettuce, which has got these pesticides, your strawberries, which has got these different pesticides in it. You're eating beef that's got antibiotics in it, probably. You're playing out in the municipal parkland that they then spray Roundup in to kill all the weeds, and your daughter's rolling around and playing in that. You know, there's all these different layers of chemicals that we're getting exposed to every day, and they're accumulating in our bodies, right? And then add to that the fact that we're not eating well enough to detox in general. And then it's a massive recipe for disaster. One of the biggest things, Glenn, that was really confronting is the rates of infertility and how things are rising with that. So it's estimated that by, I think it was in about 80 or 90 years, that our population will stabilize and begin to decline, right? And that's from a blend of infertility and also people making choices to have less kids as well. But, you know, male sperm counts reduced by 50% in the last 50 years. Right?
I saw a woman,
be a rocket scientist to think, where is that going to head if it continues on that decline?
I saw a woman who put this together. She spent like 30 years researching this, trying to test the data for flaws, because she's like, this can't be right. And it's a linear line. It's just dropping. And she's like, if this line continues on this linear descent as it has for the last 50 years, where does that go? And it's like, freaky.
I don't know if you've seen the show The Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah, I watched the first episode, the first series.
It's disturbing.
It is.
It disturbed me because it's so real. A, because we've had this kind of patriarchal society, like think witch hunts, think whatever. Women have been treated like that. B, because it's real. Like infertility is happening. You know that. So it's kind of was a bit creepy because I was like, this could actually happen. You know, we've lived in these type of realities before. It's full on. And then concurrently you have rates of miscarriage on the increase, and then you've got female fertility that's declining as well. So there's all these markers and signposts that go, if we don't change something pretty significantly, we're going to be pretty stuffed. You know, who's going to win first, Mother Earth or humans? You know, that's the kind of question I ask myself.
Yeah, and to take us out of the because of course, if someone's been listening to the last 30 minutes, we've kind of going on a bit of a health rant. It's like, fuck me, this is heavy, right? How does someone take the first step around personal responsibility from detangling themselves from this system? Because what I've found in my life with just a little bit of application, I've been able to detangle myself from that institutionalized food system, the institutionalized health system, and you know, my family is thriving. And so I think there are things we can do, despite the fact that these sort of there's this sort of systemic lock-in, specifically around health. right? Given what you do, what are some first steps that people could take if perhaps they don't have a naturopath, they haven't been seeing a naturopath regularly, they've gone once or twice, blah, 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 that they haven't kind of got the mindset of this is the most important thing if I want to thrive as an entrepreneur, as a father, as a mother, as a sister, as a brother, as a human?
The first one is self-responsibility. You need to own that where you're at right now is a consequence of what you've done. Okay, what you've been exposed to, your behaviors, your mindset, your past traumas, all of that has led you to be where you are today. Okay, so it's kind of really understanding that most of it's not random. Okay, and yes, some stuff happens, but ultimately your choices are going to dictate where you are today. So by doing that, it's then like, okay, well, what do I know and what don't I know? And you have to research. You've got to really start looking at it and be open-minded to these different concepts because it's all there. Podcasts, listen to The Shift. Podcasts, books, seeing people one-on-one. There's just so much with the internet, looking at websites, articles, like all of this stuff is at our fingertips. And where previously, 50 years ago, we didn't have this. It was you go to the doctor, what the doctor says is God, and that's your limit. Where else can you get information? Encyclopedia Britannica, we're very lucky that we're in this day and age where we can find this information, but you want to find it from people that are credible. You want to find it from people that have actually done the work, done the research, and actually know what they're talking about. And it's really about owning that and going, okay, well, if every day you can change just something little. One of the things that we say is that small shifts lead to profound changes, right? So you don't need to change everything overnight. You just every day need to take one little shift. Okay. And you do one little shift a day for 365 days a year, what's going to happen? It adds up to massive results. But, we just need to realize that progress is progress and just changing little things. And I think you're right. It is doom and gloom. When we host our environmental toxicity masterclasses, it's just like, all right, people, this is like, you're going to leave here being a bit traumatized. But the idea is what are you going to do with that information? Because 90% of this stuff you can take action on. And yes, some stuff's out of our hands, but most of it you can take action on. What am I choosing as a consumer? Am I choosing products that are free of toxins, that are organic, which means that then down the line there's more demand for that, which means that the farming practices get better, etc. So you're right. And I think we discussed this earlier. The change will come from us as individuals and community. It's not going to come from institutions. It's definitely not going to come from the government level. It's going to come from us demanding a better life for ourselves and being empowered to do that. And to do that, it is going down a bit of a rabbit hole and really understanding stuff and going, all right, well, what can I do and what can't I do? What's in my control? What's not in my control? And it's not just about what you eat. It's like, what are your emotions? What are you exposed to? What's all the different stuff that's involved in that? So this is where Get Well, Stay Well. I'm about to make a course out of that book, actually. So it's basically fundamentals. We're calling the course Shift Fundamentals, which is what is it with diet? What is it with environment? What do you need to know as that baseline fundamentals to be healthy? And then you can build on that from there.
If someone just goes, I've heard enough, I don't want to listen to podcasts. I mean, I listen to the Shift one, but I don't want to try and find someone. I'd love to connect with your team, given the way that obviously you're digital and virtual. Can they connect with you and your team? And if so, how?
Yeah, theshiftclinic.com, and they want to just check out a discovery and diagnosis session, which is easy to find. So the discovery and diagnosis, 90 minutes, where we're really looking at your landscape. What are all the different parts that make up you? What do we need to do about it? What are the initial changes that you need to make? And what is the journey if you actually want to work on some of this stuff? And I think that's really valuable. I think most people would benefit from doing one-on-ones with people, whether they're researching or doing their own stuff, because yes, there's going to be the general, these are the things you need to do. But for you, eating tomatoes and eggplants might flare up your allergies and you need that individualized advice. Or for you, potentially you're not sleeping and we need to look at what are you eating around those times to modify that. And that's where that individualized healthcare really is valuable.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, right? Because the problem with the internet, as we've found with, in the last 2 years, there's an argument for everything, right? There is an argument for why the vaccines are the best thing since sliced bread and they're the best invention of the 21st century, etc. And there's an argument for why they're the devil's spawn, right? And the research on both sides seems really compelling. And I think the challenge people have is you can read a book that says carbohydrates are good, carbohydrates are evil, fat's good, fat's evil, this, that, gut health, no, not gut health, this health, that. And it's like, as opposed to to actually do what you do, which is to go, well, this is what's going on in your body. This is where your markers are. This is how that affects everything. Let's just change some of those markers and see how you feel. And it's personalized. And all of a sudden it's like, okay, I can be actually reacting to my actual body and moving the metrics of my body like I would try and move the metrics in my business.
And I think too, it's for some people, their health is so poor, they need to get out of crisis to have the energy to take responsibility. You know, it's like getting them out of that fatigue. They're not sleeping, their anxiety is through the roof so that they're feeling good. And then they start cooking. You know, like one of the things to my clients when they're in that space, I'm not like giving them elaborate diets. I'm like, we're going to swap this. We're going to do these quick fixes. We're going to wait till you feel good. And then we're going to come in and actually make change. And one of the big things with the membership is that education piece and going, it's not optional. You actually need to go and get empowered as part of this process, you know. And one of the things that we say is we can't fix you. We just have some really good tools, resources, and expertise so that you can fix yourself, basically.
Katherine Maslen, I love you. Thank you for bringing the work that you do to the world. I'm very glad you decided to lead from the front. Thank you for your vision. Thank you for your values and your integrity, and just thank you for the, you know, I feel like the conversation just really clicked into gear when we started talking about health. You just lit up. You know, I talk about business and I'm like, you talk about health and it's just there. It's exuding through you. And I think, I think the world just needs more people that are lit up like you. So thank you. Thank you for the work that you do. And thank you for being on the Dent Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Glenn. It's been fun.
Beautiful. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, be brave, have fun. Let's go make a dent in the universe.